like for me, it was always weird because like I grew up in an environment that was predominantly white and Asian in the suburbs of Seattle. Um, but then so I didn't really identify with them. And then like, the black people in Seattle, like I would interact with, I didn't really feel like I related to them. And then like Africans, I didn't feel like I identified with them either because I was too American for them.
Yeah,
So I think that's a really interesting dichotomy for people who are in shoes like ours because we are almost between cultures, so to speak. And I just feel like from my experience, it was very pronounced because of that. I think it took me a really long time to just start embracing more who I am. And I think, like we've talked about, the changing of the guard, so to speak, has maybe made that easier in the public eye. But I'm wondering how you've grappled with your identity as, a black person, as a Eritrean American black man, knowing that maybe you do sit between cultures. Like your
yeah,
context at home is maybe different, but then also you did grow up here and whatnot.
yeah.
So how have you looked at your identity?
Yeah, it's been fascinating because I think when I was younger, I didn't so I'm not fluent in Tigrinya, our language, and I grew up being, like, American, right? Like, I grew up in Milwaukee, I grew up going to Milwaukee public schools. I grew up around Black people, I didn't grow up I grew up my parents are obviously Eritrean, all my siblings are, and it's a community, right? But it's not when it's not as deep as, like, a Chicago or, like, a DC, right? Where the main people that you hang out with all the time and your community of friends all the time are Eritrean, right? You grow up into like when you're in a city like Milwaukee, you naturally just gravitate to Americans, right? Like to the black
Hmm.
people at school, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
like it just wasn't the majority of like my friends or like my population, right? So growing up, I was very much into my culture and like I would go do a whole bunch of like things with my parents all the time. Like, they would take me to church with them in Chicago for service. My parents did traditional Eritrean things all the time. It was weird in a way where it was like I really did had to balance it right. And as a kid, I think I didn't know like how to really balance it. I just knew that I just wanted to be accepted and just have a good time in both of these cultures and just and enjoy both of them for what they were. So it's like when I'm at school, I'm with my black friends, right? And then I'm at home and I'm
Mm.
with my parents and my culture and like my community of people, right? So I think it was a little bit of that way where it was like I kind of, I had to balance them both because at school, like again, like I hung out with mostly just the black people, right? So it was there. And then away from that, when I came home, I was Eritrean in a way.
Mm.
Because when I come home, I ain't under Black American rules. I'm under Eritrean rules, right? My mama and daddy, they speaking Tigrinya to me. They're telling me I can't do this and that. I can't play this and that. No, it's none of that American. It's like Eritrean. The boundaries at home are like Eritrean, right? So it's like at
Hmm.
home, I was very much rooted in my culture, and then I had to go to school, and because there just wasn't other people there, I kind of had to be American in a way. And it kind of again gets back to the point I was making before about like how it just wasn't like socially accepted, right? If I was going to school and like being Eritrean was like a thing, right? Like people loved it, right? I would have been the same Eritrean me that I was at home, at school, and it would have been perfectly fine. It would have been an easy, smooth transition, right? But I felt like a lot of times at school, to fit in with my friends at school, I had to be American, right? Because it just
Yeah.
wasn't accepted at that point, right? It just wasn't. I was the African, so it was very different. I just try to blend in with my friends as an American.
Mm.
So growing up in that way, you just really had to combat both of them in that type of way. And then I think as I got
Mm.
older and as I become an adult now, like I have a more mastered version of this, right? Where I have Eritrean community, my culture is my top priority. It is like everything about me. It is what I'm prideful about, and I'm able to really like kind of mix them both beautifully in a way where, for example, like I take pride in being, well, I don't say being because I've transitioned away from journalism, but I took pride in being an Eritrean like American journalist, right? Like being a
Mm.
journalist in America that's Eritrean. Like there aren't many of us that were actually doing it. Like it's only a handful of people that were doing that, right? I took a lot of pride in that and being able to, move away from battling both of these things when I was younger to now, like I'm older, and I'll figure out a way to like really tie them in a really smart and great way where I could really showcase and spotlight both being an American and a Black American, and also an Eritrean too. So now it's like now I'm older, and I'm like, yeah, I always tell people like, I'm Eritrean when they ask me what I am, but it's that's kind of like the first step for me now. Now since it's more socially acceptable to be Eritrean, and I'm not getting called an African in that type of way no more. It's so much easier for me to just be able to dominantly tell people I'm Eritrean now, and to go that way, and to tell people about my culture, to like, to now inspire people as well. Like it's a lot different now. It's so as an adult now, it's kind of flipped in a way, but definitely a different change now for sure compared to when you're a kid and you're going to school, and again, like you have to balance both of those worlds. But now it's like it's way more accepted, so it's a lot better.
You mentioned how, like, growing up, when you would go home, like, it's different. You knew the standard was different because you were going home to Eritrean parents. I guess,
Yeah,
can you explain, I guess, maybe more specifically what that means for maybe people who don't understand? Because I think in my own context, I understand just with Ghanaian parents, just the the precedent that homework took, and just all these
yeah.
different things. But
It's
like,
hard being an African,
yeah.
like in an African household, because like the expectations are so different.
Mhm.
But no, like honestly, I don't even think this is even just Africans. Like, man, I went to middle school with a girl. She was Hmong. Milwaukee has like a really, I think it still has a big Hmong population, I think. But there was a girl that I went to, man. She was in one of my classes, man. She was so strict. She was so brilliantly smart. She's one of the smartest people I've ever had in my fucking life. And she got straight A's like every semester. There was one semester where she got, I think, like a B plus in the class. Okay. She came back, man, and she had a haircut. Like her hair was long, like
Yo,
to her shoulder, and her hair was cut a little bit shorter.
dog,
And she was like, her dad just wasn't having it. That she got a B plus instead of the A. And
dog.
so when I tell people, I don't think it's ever been anywhere near a little bit close to that. But like when I tell people what it's like being like the child of like immigrant parents in America, like that's the type of pressures we gotta deal with.
Mhm.
Like, because there's so many like expectations for us, rightfully so, right? Like our parents fought to get to this country and they fought to give
Yeah.
us an opportunity. We better knock that out the park, right? Like we better make sure that we make sure the sacrifices were worth it, you know? And so thankfully I didn't have to do anything like that. I got long hair now, and if my parents ever made me cut this, I'd probably be sad. Um but there was just a lot of different expectations, right? Like I couldn't my homies are like kicking it on a Thursday night at a bowling alley. I ain't really like that. My parents were like, no, you gotta do your
Dog,
homework, you gotta
I
study.
wouldn't be able to do that either. I couldn't do that.
Can't
That wouldn't
can't
slide at all.
can't do it, you know? I tried to
Mhm.
play sports when I was younger, right? I mean, it would make sense, right? Like we love sports for a living. Of course I would want to play sports, right? My parents are very much like practice after school. What do you mean you have to go to practice? You have to come home and do your homework, and you have to study, and then you have to get ready for school tomorrow. You're not going to practice until like for 2 or 3 hours. Like they could, but so there's some barriers in that way where like my parents couldn't understand. Like, no, I have to balance that, right? Like I got to be able to balance that. But they, no, they're in charge. They run the show. I can't challenge my parents about that, right? So there's just a lot of those types of rules in place for parents in African households, especially I think at least in an Eritrean household like mine was like I couldn't really do after school activities like that unless it was like, hey, if you want to play music, you want to play the piano, you can go do those piano
Yeah.
classes after school, right? You want to play soccer, you can go play soccer, right? But football, basketball, I don't know about that one. Like they just weren't really about it like that. And then it's like, think about stuff on the weekends, right? Like even on the weekends, a lot of times I spent it with like some of my homies in my Eritrean community. Like that's really what it was, or like people in my neighborhood where like my parents knew that they could watch me. They knew that I wasn't leaving their sight. They're very
Mhm.
protective in that type of way, rightfully so, because it's crazy out here. But it was limited in that way, and I don't ever, as an adult now, I don't ever like fault my parents or anything like that, or like blame my parents for like why I'm not like a D1 athlete today or something like that, or like I have these feelings towards my parents for limiting me in that way because my parents did ultimately what they felt was the best for me, and I
Mhm.
can't be mad at my parents for doing the best with me that they could. Right? My parents,
Mhm.
they gave me a roof over my head, they gave me food, they gave me an opportunity to go to school. The rest of it. yeah, I wish it could have been a little bit different. I wish I could have played football more. I wish I could have played basketball more. I wish I could have did more extracurricular activities, things like that, right? And had like more of that normalized, like I want to say normalized, more of like an American student type of life, right? But ultimately, that's just not what it was for me. My parents did the best that they could with me, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm always going to pay it forward for that. Now, my job as as a now an adult, and hopefully hopes to have kids one day. And so now I can now be able to kind of break that. And now my if when I hopefully have children, my children, if they want to play football, they can go ahead and do that. I'm not going to do those same things my parents did to me because I have a better understanding now, right? My parents gave me this opportunity now to kind of pay it
Mhm,
forward. So that's
mhm.
just kind of how I look at it now. Like I look back at it, I think, man, I would have been good at football if my parents let me play a little bit more, right? Or
Mhm.
if they would have let me invest in baseball more after school or whatever the case may be. I I don't try to think about that stuff because ultimately my parents did the best that they could with me, and they gave me an opportunity at life. They gave me a good opportunity for school, and hey, man, I'm still successful. So that's kind of what I'm grateful for, and I just look back on it in that type of way now.
So because of the structure in place, right, with your family, your parents, how they raise you, how has that shaped your perception on what success and achievement means in your career?
Yeah, I think for me, it's fascinating because like I'm an overthinker. I I've realized that I've done some people remind me a lot of times that I do and have done some really cool in my career. Right. I'm a big overthinker where like I kind of undersell myself a lot of time. But I look back at like some of the places that I've been able to work and some of the projects that I've been able to work on, some of the people that I've been able to meet, and I'm like, that's actually really cool, right? Like, and so I used to be like really hard on myself. I think because my parents were really hard on me, right? Like, I know a lot of people I think in African households that are like that. They're just very hard on themselves because they have a high expectation, they have a high bar for things, but they're just kind of instilled in us like when we were younger, right? But I think for me, I look at like happiness and I also look at like success, right? As like how do I feel, right? Like,
Mhm.
do I have memories of things that I really care about that I look back on? I'm like, I remember that. That's something that's a core memory to me, something that I really value, right? Do I have these type of things in my life? And I do. And to me, that counts as success now. Like, that's how I kind of look at success is like, do I have memories of things that like I really enjoy, periods of my life and moments that I was able to accomplish? I'm really proud of what I was able to do. And I do. And I've been able to now define success for me in that type of way. And I think that is like, that's one of the most essential things I think a lot of people need to do in general, but especially people that come from African households, whether they're Eritrean or Ethiopian, whatever the case may be, is like you get to define what success is for you. Like now your
Mm.
parents, now what society is, ultimately you get to decide that. So I have decided to do that for myself. And I look at some of the things and I'm like, I kind of undersell myself for a while. And I've gotten older and I've got to be able to be more reflective and like intentional and thinking about a lot of my career. I'm like, man, I've done some pretty dope shit, man. Like I've done some pretty nice stuff that frankly, a lot of people one in journalism have been able to do. A lot of people in my culture have never been able to do. And frankly, what a lot of people from Milwaukee have never been able to do. I've done some
Mhm.
really dope shit that like I kind of look back on and I count that as success. I count that as something that like I'm really proud of like some of the things that I was able to do that I define as success now. So that's kind of how I view it now. And as I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate and kind of see success in that type of way as something that I get to define and not my parents or other people.